When we say that the West and Europe do not care one bit about Africa, some people think we are just talking. Recently, the leaders of the AES Confederation, Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso, Assimi Goita of Mali, and General Tiani of Niger, sent a letter to the UN Security Council condemning Ukraine's support for the Tuareg rebels, who have caused chaos and insecurity in Mali. Yes, you heard that right. Ukraine gave ample support to the armed rebels in Mali, which led to the deaths of dozens of Malian soldiers, as well as Russian soldiers. How wicked and atrocious is that? Doesn't this action by Ukraine constitute a crime against humanity? Will the United Nations respond to the AES Confederation? Let's find out. When the Prime Minister of Mali sent a letter to the UN Security Council earlier this year about how they have evidence that France was responsible for arming the rebels and causing the insecurity in Mali, the UN Security Council didn't respond to the letter, and most people did not believe him. But a recent event that happened just showed that what Mali's Prime Minister said has an iota of truth. The fact is that the West only cares about their interests and does not care who gets burned on the path to getting or actualizing those interests. Think about what happened last month. You know, Mali, as well as other countries in the Sahel, are currently battling with insecurity, either from Islamic jihadists or, in the case of Mali, the Tuareg armed rebels. These rebels have been causing chaos and insecurity in Mali since 2012, and according to them, they are fighting for their supposed independence. At one point, they even collaborated with the Islamist jihadists, who were still few at the time, until they separated. But are they truly fighting for their independence? When African nationalists were fighting for their independence, they didn't go about killing people and destroying properties. They achieved their vision with their voice. But all the Tuareg separatists have done since 2012 is cause chaos and insecurity, which means that they are not truly fighting for independence as they say, but they have an ulterior motive. Now, late last month, these rebels launched a heavy attack on Mali's military, which led to the death of at least 84 Russian mercenaries and 47 Malian soldiers over 3 days of fighting. While the nation was still reeling from the losses suffered, the spokesperson for Ukraine's military intelligence agency, Andriy Yusov, told the public broadcaster Suspilna that the Malian rebels had received all the information they needed, which allowed them to carry out their operation against the Russian war criminals. In fact, he categorically said, the rebels received the necessary information they needed that allowed them to conduct a successful operation. To make matters worse, after the attack, the Tuareg rebels published an appeal to Ukrainians. They expressed solidarity with Ukraine in the fight against Russia and offered to hand over the captured mercenaries of the PMC Wagner. Now, if you put all these together, the first question that comes to mind is how did the authorities in Ukraine know that the Tuareg rebels received the necessary information needed to launch the attack? Secondly, why did the Tuareg rebels express solidarity with Ukraine in the fight against Russia? The answer to these two questions is obvious. Ukraine is responsible for providing the information to the Tuareg rebels. There is no other explanation for it. Of course, the Ukrainian authorities denied the accusations, but their flimsy denial was not sufficient to appease the authorities in Mali and even Niger. And, not surprisingly, Mali as well as Niger cut off diplomatic relations with Ukraine, citing support for terrorist groups as their reason. According to Maiga, the Prime Minister of Mali, Ukraine's actions violated Malian sovereignty and constituted unacceptable foreign interference and support for international terrorism. The question is, why would Ukraine do such a thing? First of all, if you check the Western media that carried the news of the attack by the Tuareg rebels, emphasis is made more on the death of the Russian mercenaries, as if the death of the Malian soldiers don't mean much. The reason for this will tell you why Ukraine decided to support the Tuareg rebels, knowing fully well the consequences. As everyone knows, Russia and Ukraine have been at war since 2022. In recent times, Ukraine seems to be gaining the upper hand with the help of its Western allies, the US, France, the UK, and the others. While the war has been going on which has isolated Russia, Russia has been making inroads in Africa, building and deepening alliance with African countries, especially in the Sahel region. As you know, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have distanced themselves from their traditional partner, the West, and chosen Russia and other non-Western countries such as China and Turkey as partners. In Mali, for instance, since Captain Assimi Goita came into power, he has kicked out most of the Western and European forces that were stationed in Mali to help fight the insecurity and replaced them with the soldiers from Russia's Wagner group. Interestingly, with Russia's Wagner, Mali has been able to gain some victory over the Tuareg rebels. Late last year, Mali was able to recover Kidal, a region in Mali that had formerly been taken over by the Tuareg rebels. However, Russia's growing influence in Africa seems to be a thorn in the side of the West, which regard Russia as its greatest enemy and an evil that needs to be destroyed. So, with this background, you can imagine why Ukraine would not want Russia to gain more influence in Africa. Essentially, the authorities in Ukraine decided to help the Tuareg rebels by providing the necessary information needed to defeat Wagner, and unfortunately, they succeeded. According to the report, the attack appears to be the heaviest defeat suffered by Wagner since it stepped into the conflict 2 years ago. For Ukraine, the elimination of a handful of Wagner mercenaries, whose loss would cause no meaningful harm to the Russian war machine, is more important to its cause than the support of entire African nations and the lives of African soldiers. Basically, the statement made by the spokesperson for Ukraine's military was a statement of gloat against Russia and happiness that 84 Russian war criminals, as he puts them, died at the hands of the Tuareg rebels. Isn't that a crime against humanity? This is why, as a show of solidarity, the leaders of the AES Confederation sent a letter to the UN Security Council in which they condemned Ukraine's alleged support for the Tuareg rebels. In the document, the heads of the ministries of foreign affairs of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso strongly condemned the alleged open support of international terrorism by the Ukrainian government and called on the Security Council to take responsibility for Ukraine's actions and prevent subversive actions that threaten regional and continental stability. The question is, how will the UN Security Council react? Honestly, the leaders of the AES shouldn't have bothered sending a letter because nothing will be done. Ukraine, just like the other Western countries that have committed war crimes and crimes against humanity, will not be sanctioned or penalized. Why? Simple. The West is in charge of the UN Security Council. There is no African country representing Africa in that council, so nothing will be done. The reverse will be the case if this was done by an African country. It would take only a few hours for the world to hear that that African country has been sanctioned and penalized. How many Western countries have you heard that have been sanctioned? It seems it's only countries in the global South that commits crimes worthy of being punished. How hypocritical of the West. The best thing that could be done has already been done, which is cutting off diplomatic ties with Ukraine, and it would really be nice if all African countries follow in the footsteps of the AES Confederation. Just imagine how Ukraine was ready to sacrifice the lives of Malian soldiers and the instability in another country just because it is in a war with Russia. Where is the humanity and justice that the West is always talking about? For too long, Africa has been the subject and playground of the interest of the West. Isn't it time for Africa to stand up? To make matters worse, the leaders of most African countries are working in cahoots with the West to make the continent remain as it is. It is such a shame that these leaders are too wicked and greedy to have a sense of patriotism for their countries. Anyways, it's our hope that the leaders of the AES Confederation will continue in this path they have started and be the breakthrough that the continent needs to achieve greatness.